Tuesday evening, my phone rang while I was reviewing client files. Mom's voice came through the speaker, steady but apologetic. "You won't be at Thanksgiving this year, honey. Emma's new husband, Derek, thinks you'd ruin the vibe. He says you're too intense and judgmental about everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there in complete silence, holding the phone against my ear as my mother continued talking. "Derek is such a wonderful addition to the family, and we want to keep things peaceful this year. You understand, right?" I hung up without saying goodbye, something I'd never done to my mother in my 32 years of life. The silence in my Lincoln Park apartment felt suffocating as I stared at the city lights twinkling beyond my window. My laptop screen still glowed with quarterly financial reports, but the numbers blurred together as tears threatened to spill over. This wasn't the first time I'd been excluded from family gatherings because of one of Emma's boyfriends, but it was definitely the most painful. My younger sister had a pattern that stretched back to high school of bringing home men who seemed designed to create chaos. There was Marcus, the gambling addict who convinced my parents to lend him $5,000 for what he claimed was a sure-thing investment. Then came Bradley, who turned out to be married with 2 kids in Milwaukee. Most recently, there was Tyler, who actually stole my grandmother's antique jewelry during Easter dinner last year. Each time, I was the one who voiced concerns. Each time, the family painted me as the difficult one, the sister who couldn't just be happy for Emma. It didn't matter that I was usually right about these men. What mattered was keeping the peace and supporting Emma's choices, no matter how obviously destructive they were. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the most successful member of our family. I worked as a senior financial auditor at Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in downtown Chicago. My corner office on the 38th floor overlooked Lake Michigan, and I supervised a team of 12 junior auditors. My specialty was uncovering corporate fraud, following paper trails that others missed, connecting financial dots that exposed embezzlement schemes and securities violations. Companies across the Midwest sought out my expertise when they suspected internal theft or needed independent audits for mergers and acquisitions. I'd testified as an expert witness in federal court cases and had been featured in 3 different trade publications as one of the top fraud detection specialists under 40 in the region. My personal life might have been quieter than Emma's dramatic romances, but it was stable and purposeful. I owned my apartment outright, had a healthy retirement account, maintained close friendships with 3 women I'd known since college, and volunteered at a financial literacy nonprofit on weekends. I read 2 books a month, took cooking classes for fun, and had season tickets to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Yet, somehow, in my family's eyes, I was the problem. I was too intense, too judgmental, too unwilling to just go with the flow when Emma brought home another walking red flag. Derek Matthews had appeared in Emma's life 6 months ago. She'd met him at some networking event downtown and been completely swept off her feet. Within 2 weeks, they were practically living together. Within a month, he'd proposed. The engagement party had been a rushed affair at my parents' house in Oak Park, with Derek charming everyone by talking about his successful tech company and his plans to make Emma his business partner. I'd tried to ask basic questions about his background, his business, his previous relationships. Normal things that any caring family member might wonder about when someone proposes to their sister after knowing her for 30 days. But every question I raised was met with eye rolls and comments about how I needed to trust Emma's judgment and stop being so suspicious. The wedding had been 3 months ago, a small ceremony at a country club in Naperville. Derek had insisted on paying for everything, which impressed my parents enormously. I'd bitten my tongue through the entire reception, watching him work the room like a politician, telling different stories to different groups of guests, always positioning himself as the successful entrepreneur who'd rescued Emma from her mundane life as a marketing coordinator. Something about Derek had never sat right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. Maybe it was the way his stories about his company always seemed just a little too vague, or how he'd change the subject whenever anyone asked specific questions about his work. There was something performative about his charm, like he was playing a role rather than being genuine. But Emma was glowing with happiness, and my parents were thrilled to finally see their younger daughter settled down with someone who seemed financially secure. My concerns were dismissed as jealousy or an inability to see Emma as an independent adult capable of making her own choices. Now, sitting in my apartment on the Tuesday night before Thanksgiving, I faced the reality that Derek's influence had finally achieved what none of Emma's previous boyfriends had managed. I was being completely excluded from the family holiday, not just discouraged from attending or asked to keep my opinions to myself, but explicitly uninvited because my very presence would ruin the vibe. I made myself a cup of tea and decided that wallowing wasn't going to solve anything. If my family wanted to spend Thanksgiving without me, I'd use the time productively. I had 3 client files that needed detailed review, and the quiet office building would be perfect for concentrated work. Maybe I'd even take on some of the overflow cases that had been sitting in our department's pending folder. I was pulling up my work email when my phone buzzed with a text from my assistant Madison. Emergency client meeting request for Thursday morning. High-profile case, willing to pay triple consultation fee for rush timeline. Should I schedule? I texted back immediately. Yes, send me the details. Working on Thanksgiving morning would be perfect. It would keep my mind off the family dinner I was missing, and the triple fee would be a nice bonus for my interrupted holiday. Sometimes the best opportunities came from unexpected places. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather in Chicago. I dressed carefully in my favorite navy blue power suit, the one that made me feel confident and professional no matter what kind of client meeting I was walking into. The Armani jacket had been an investment piece 3 years ago, but it had paid for itself in the confidence it gave me during high-stakes negotiations and depositions. The Morrison and Associates building stood like a glass monument in the heart of the financial district. On a normal Thursday, the lobby would be bustling with professionals hurrying to meetings, but Thanksgiving morning brought an almost eerie quiet. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I crossed to the elevator bank, nodding to the security guard who recognized me despite the holiday. The 38th floor felt particularly spacious without the usual crowd of auditors, analysts, and administrative staff filling the hallways. I stopped by Madison's desk to pick up the client file she'd prepared, grateful that she'd agreed to come in early to coordinate this emergency meeting despite the holiday. The client specifically requested you by name, Madison explained, handing me a thin folder. Derek Matthews, CEO of TechFlow Solutions. They're dealing with suspected embezzlement and need immediate consultation. He seemed really anxious to meet with you specifically, mentioned that he'd heard about your reputation in financial fraud detection. I scanned the basic information in the file. TechFlow Solutions appeared to be a mid-sized technology company specializing in financial software. The suspected embezzlement involved potentially significant sums, though the details were vague. What struck me as odd was how insistent Mr. Matthews had been about meeting immediately, even offering to pay our premium emergency consultation rate without hesitation. Did he say how he got my name? I asked Madison as we walked toward conference room B. He mentioned reading about your testimony in that IPO fraud case last year, said he needed someone with your specific expertise in software-related financial crimes. That made sense. The Meridian Industries case had been high profile, and my analysis of their falsified revenue reporting had been crucial in securing convictions for 3 executives. Word-of-mouth referrals weren't uncommon in my field. Conference Room B was our largest meeting space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. I arranged my materials on the polished conference table and reviewed my standard consultation questions. Corporate embezzlement cases usually followed predictable patterns, though each had unique elements that required careful investigation. At exactly 9 o'clock, Madison knocked on the door. "Mr. Matthews is here. Should I bring him in?" "Please do." I stood and smoothed my skirt, preparing to greet another nervous CEO who'd discovered that trusted employees had been stealing from his company. I extended my hand with a professional smile as the conference room door opened. The man who walked through the door made my blood freeze in my veins. Derek Matthews was Emma's husband. For a moment, time seemed suspended. I stood there with my hand outstretched, staring at the face I'd seen across dinner tables and at family gatherings for the past 6 months. His expression went from confident businessman to absolute horror in the span of 2 seconds. "No," he whispered, stumbling backward toward the door. No, this can't be happening." Madison looked between us with confusion. "Is everything all right? Do you two know each other?" Derek's face had gone completely pale. He grabbed the doorframe for support and started shouting. "You can't be here! This isn't possible! I specifically asked for Sonia Williams." I am Sonia Williams, I said quietly, my professional training helping me maintain composure despite the earthquake happening in my chest. And you're my sister's husband. Mr. Matthews, please sit down, Madison said, moving toward him with concern. You look like you might faint. Can I get you some water? But Derek wasn't listening to her. He was staring at me with wild eyes, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. 5 years wasn't long enough, he muttered. I thought I was safe. I thought you couldn't find me. The words hit me like physical blows. 5 years, find him. These weren't the confused ramblings of a man shocked to discover his auditor was his sister-in-law. These were the words of someone who knew exactly who I was and had been actively avoiding me. Derek, what are you talking about? I kept my voice level and professional, though my heart was pounding. If you need financial consultation, please sit down and we can discuss your company's situation. He laughed, a high-pitched sound that didn't match his usual confident demeanor. My company's situation? Oh, that's rich. That's really rich. Madison was looking increasingly concerned. Should I call building security? Mr. Matthews, you really need to calm down. Don't you understand? Derek spun around to face Madison, his voice growing louder. She's going to ruin everything. She's going to destroy my life just like she tried to before. I had never tried to destroy Derek's life. I'd never even met Derek before he started dating Emma. But the look in his eyes suggested a shared history that I couldn't remember. More disturbing was his obvious terror at seeing me, as if my very presence posed some kind of existential threat. Derek, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, I said carefully. Why don't you sit down and explain what kind of financial consultation you need? We can work through whatever concerns you have about embezzlement at your company. Embezzlement, he repeated, then started laughing again. You want to talk about embezzlement? That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. He pulled out his phone and started pacing the room frantically. I need to leave. I need to leave right now. This was a mistake. This was a huge mistake. Mr. Matthews, please don't leave, Madison said firmly. You scheduled this emergency consultation and insisted on our highest priority service. At minimum, you'll be charged for the full session whether you stay or go. Derek stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, definitely, but also something else, recognition. And beneath it all, a desperate kind of calculation, like he was trying to figure out how much damage this encounter might cause. You don't remember, do you? He said finally, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. You actually don't remember who I am. The statement hung in the air between us. Madison looked completely lost, clearly wondering if she should call someone or just let this bizarre scene play out. I searched my memory for any previous connection to Derek Matthews, coming up empty. I'm sorry, but no, I don't remember meeting you before you started dating my sister, I admitted. When and where do you think we've met? Derek's laugh this time was bitter and sharp. Met? We didn't just meet, Sonia. We were business partners. For 2 years. We built something together, and then you tried to destroy me when things didn't work out the way you wanted. Business partners, 2 years. The time frame clicked into place suddenly, and my memory began reconstructing a period of my life I'd tried very hard to forget. 5 years ago. Northwestern University's graduate business program. A partnership that had ended in financial disaster and professional humiliation that had taken me years to recover from. Audit Tech Innovations. Oh my God, I whispered. You're Derek Matthews from Audit Tech. His smile was grim and satisfied. Now you remember your old friend. The room felt like it was tilting. Derek Matthews, my former business partner who had disappeared with our intellectual property and left me drowning in debt, was my sister's husband. The man who had stolen my revolutionary fraud detection software and vanished with a $2 million investment was now part of my family. And he'd just walked into my office asking for help with embezzlement. Madison, please give us some privacy, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in my mind. Close the door behind you and hold all my calls. She hesitated, clearly sensing the tension in the room. Are you sure? I can stay if you need me to. I'm fine, thank you. After Madison left, I turned to face the man who had once been my closest friend and business partner, and who was now my brother-in-law. Derek had stopped pacing and was standing by the window, his reflection ghostly against the gray November sky. Sit down, I said firmly. We need to talk. I don't have to do anything you tell me, he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The bravado from his earlier outburst had faded, replaced by something that looked like resignation. No, you don't, I agreed, but you scheduled this meeting. You specifically requested me, and you mentioned embezzlement. So either you're going to explain what kind of game you're playing, or I'm going to assume this whole thing was some kind of setup. Derek finally moved away from the window and slumped into one of the leather conference chairs. For the first time since he'd walked into the room, he looked like the man I remembered from graduate school. Brilliant but reckless, charming but fundamentally selfish. It wasn't supposed to be you, he said quietly. When I called, I asked for Sonia Williams. I had no idea you'd kept your maiden name after everything. After you destroyed my credit and left me with $60,000 in business debt? He flinched. I didn't know things would get that bad for you. You didn't stick around to find out. The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. Derek and I had met during our first semester at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. We'd been assigned to the same study group for advanced financial analysis and had immediately clicked over our shared fascination with fraud detection methodology. Our partnership had started as an academic exercise. Professor Martinez had assigned us to develop a theoretical model for identifying suspicious financial patterns in real time. While other teams were creating presentations and writing papers, Derek and I had actually built working software. Our audit tech program could analyze financial data and flag irregularities that human auditors might miss. It was revolutionary for its time, combining traditional accounting principles with cutting-edge algorithmic analysis. We spent 2 years refining the system, working 18-hour days in a cramped office space we'd rented in Evanston. Derek handled the business development side while I focused on the technical aspects. He was natural with potential investors, able to explain complex financial concepts in accessible terms. I preferred working with the code, perfecting the detection algorithms, ensuring our analysis was bulletproof. We'd been so close to success. VenturePoint Capital had expressed serious interest in funding our expansion. The preliminary meetings had gone well, and we'd been invited to make a formal presentation to their investment committee. That's when Derek betrayed me. Tell me about your meeting with VenturePoint, I said, settling into the chair across from him. The one you had without me. Derek's shoulders sagged. You're never going to forgive me for that, are you? You presented our work as solely your creation. You signed an exclusive deal. You dissolved our partnership and left me responsible for all our business debts. Why would I forgive you for that? Because I was 26 years old and scared out of my mind, he said, finally meeting my eyes. VenturePoint wanted to move fast. They said partnerships were too complicated for their investment model. They wanted a single founder with complete control. So you chose to be that founder. I chose to take an opportunity that might not have come again. By lying about my role in creating the software, by simplifying the story to something they could understand and approve quickly. I stared at him across the conference table, this man who had once been my closest friend and most trusted collaborator. Do you hear yourself right now? You're still justifying it. 5 years later, and you still think what you did was reasonable. What I did was survive, Derek said, his voice growing defensive. What I did was take a chance when it was offered. Would it have been nice to include you? Sure. But VenturePoint was clear about their requirements. Their requirements that you made sure to meet by throwing me under the bus. I didn't throw you anywhere. I took an opportunity that was available to me. The casual way he dismissed what had happened to me was breathtaking. When Derek disappeared with our intellectual property and the VenturePoint investment, I'd been left holding the bag for everything we'd built together. Our office lease, equipment loans, development costs, and contractor payments had all been structured under both our names. When Derek dissolved the partnership and vanished, all of those obligations became mine alone. My credit had been destroyed. My reputation in Chicago's small financial technology community was ruined. I'd had to take entry-level positions and work nights to pay off the debts Derek had left me with. It had taken 3 years of grinding, careful work to rebuild my career to the point where I could apply for the position at Morrison & Associates. What happened to the VenturePoint money? I asked. Derek shifted uncomfortably. The initial investment was smaller than they'd promised, and bringing a product to market is expensive. So you burned through $2 million. I built a company, TechFlow Solutions. We specialize in financial software consulting. Something clicked into place. You're using our audit tech software. I'm using software that I helped develop. Software that I wrote 80% of. Software that wouldn't exist without my business relationships and investor connections. I felt anger building in my chest, the same fury I'd experienced 5 years ago when I discovered what Derek had done. You stole from me. You stole my work, you stole my future, and you left me to clean up the mess you created. I didn't steal anything, Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. We were partners. Partners share in both success and failure. Partners don't secretly meet with investors behind each other's backs. Partners don't lie about each other's contributions. And partners don't disappear in the middle of the night, leaving all the debts and responsibilities behind. Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I never meant for you to get hurt. But you didn't care enough to prevent it. I was 26 and stupid and scared. I made a bad decision. You made a selfish decision. And then you made another selfish decision when you started dating my sister. His head snapped up. What does Emma have to do with this? You're telling me it's a coincidence that you happened to meet and fall in love with the sister of the business partner you screwed over? In a city of 3 million people, you just randomly happened to encounter Emma? Derek's expression confirmed what I'd already suspected. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. I kept track of you. After everything happened, I wanted to make sure you were okay. You kept track of me. Not like that. Not in a creepy way. I just checked in occasionally, professional networking sites, things like that. I saw that you'd gotten the job at Morrison & Associates, that you were rebuilding your career. I was glad you were doing well. And during this casual stalking of my professional life, you somehow met Emma. I saw her profile on your social media. She was tagged in some family photos you'd posted. She's beautiful, and her profile said she worked in marketing downtown. I thought maybe if I got to know her, I could find a way to make things right with you. The audacity was staggering. So you targeted my sister as a way to get back into my life? I didn't target anyone. I asked her out because I thought she was attractive and interesting. The connection to you was just convenient. Convenient for what? Derek was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his words changed everything I thought I understood about his motivations. I need your help. You need my help, I repeated slowly, trying to process the incredible nerve required to make such a statement. After stealing my work, destroying my credit, and manipulating my sister into marrying you, you need my help. Derek reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. TechFlow Solutions is under federal investigation. He slid the folder across the table to me. I opened it cautiously, finding legal documents bearing the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words Securities Fraud Investigation appeared in bold letters across the top of the first page. The FBI has been investigating my company for the past 4 months, Derek continued, his voice taking on a desperate edge. They think I've been using the audit tech software to help companies hide financial irregularities instead of exposing them. I looked up from the documents. Have you? That's a complicated question. No, it's not. It's a yes or no question. Derek ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered from our graduate school days. The software we developed was designed to identify suspicious financial patterns. But with some modifications, it can also be used to identify which financial patterns are most likely to trigger audit investigations. So, you've been selling audit avoidance services to companies that want to commit fraud. I've been providing consultation services to companies that want to minimize their audit exposure while maintaining compliance with regulations. The distinction he was trying to make was meaningless, and we both knew it. Derek, that's fraud. That's exactly the kind of corporate crime the software was designed to prevent. The software doesn't determine whether something is legal or illegal. It just analyzes patterns and provides information. What clients do with that information is their decision. I flipped through more pages in the folder, finding client lists and financial records that painted a clear picture of Derek's activities. TechFlow Solutions had been charging premium fees to help companies structure their financial reporting in ways that would avoid detection by auditors and regulators. How many companies? I asked. What do you mean? If this story resonated with you or helped you think about your own family relationships differently, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about the complicated nature of love, accountability, and healing. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear about the importance of choosing justice over enabling, even when it's the hardest choice you'll ever make. I haven't helped anyone hide anything. I've provided analytical services that allow clients to better understand audit processes. Derek, answer the question, how many clients? He was quiet for nearly a minute before responding. 43 companies over the past 3 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 43 companies meant potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in hidden fraud. It meant investors deceived, employees cheated, and regulatory systems undermined on a massive scale. And the FBI found out how? One of my clients got careless. Meridian Technologies. They used our analysis to hide revenue manipulation that eventually collapsed when they couldn't maintain the fiction anymore. When the FBI investigated Meridian, they found emails referencing TechFlow consultation services. Meridian Technologies. I remembered reading about their bankruptcy 6 months ago. Thousands of employees had lost their jobs when it was revealed that the company had been falsifying revenue reports for over 2 years. You helped them steal money from investors and employees. I provided analytical services that they used inappropriately. You knew exactly what they were doing with your analysis. I suspected, but I didn't have proof. You didn't want proof because it was more profitable to stay ignorant. Derek slumped further into his chair. The FBI thinks I was the mastermind behind a network of coordinated fraud. They think I was actively recruiting companies to participate in securities violations. Were you? Some clients were referred by other clients, but I never actively recruited anyone to commit crimes. I continued reading through the FBI documents, finding evidence that suggested Derek's operation had been far more extensive and coordinated than he was admitting. There were email chains discussing audit-resistant reporting structures and regulatory compliance optimization. There were invoices for services described as financial pattern camouflage and detection algorithm circumvention. Derek, these emails make it clear that you are advertising fraud services. Those are just marketing terms. Every consultant uses language that makes their services sound more sophisticated than they really are. Detection algorithm circumvention isn't marketing language, it's a literal description of helping clients avoid getting caught. The FBI is interpreting everything in the worst possible light. Because you were literally helping companies commit fraud using software that I designed to prevent fraud. Do you understand how twisted that is? Derek leaned forward across the conference table, his expression becoming more intense. That's why I need your help. You're the most respected fraud detection expert in the region. If you testified that the audit tech software wasn't designed to facilitate fraud, if you explained that it was my modifications and misuse of the system that created these problems, the FBI might consider that I was acting independently rather than as part of a larger criminal conspiracy. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to testify on your behalf? I want you to testify truthfully about what the software was designed to do. In exchange for what? Derek reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a cashier's check. $500,000. Plus 20% of TechFlow's gross revenue for the next 2 years. He slid the check across the table. It was made out to me for exactly $500,000. This is blood money, I said, pushing the check back toward him. This is compensation for your expertise and consultation. This is a bribe to help you avoid federal prison. This is a business arrangement between professionals. I closed the FBI folder and looked directly at Derek. What does Emma think about all of this? His expression changed immediately, shifting from desperate negotiation to something that looked like panic. Emma doesn't know about the investigation. She doesn't know her husband is under federal investigation for securities fraud? She doesn't need to know. This will all be resolved soon, and there's no reason to worry her unnecessarily. Derek, if you're convicted, she'll be affected too. Spouses can be held liable for their partner's criminal financial activities. Emma isn't involved in any of this. The FBI might not see it that way. Derek's panic was becoming more visible. That's another reason I need your help. If this gets worse, if they decide to expand the investigation, Emma could get pulled into it. She's innocent. She doesn't deserve to be punished for my mistakes. For the first time since he'd walked into the conference room, Derek was saying something I could almost respect. His concern for Emma seemed genuine, which was more than I could say for anything else he'd told me. But then he kept talking. Besides, Emma's pregnant. The stress of a federal investigation could be dangerous for the baby. Emma was pregnant. My sister was having a baby with this man who was facing federal fraud charges and had built his entire business on stolen intellectual property. How pregnant? I asked. About 3 months. We haven't told the family yet. We were planning to announce it at Thanksgiving dinner. The irony was devastating. While I was being excluded from Thanksgiving because Derek thought I would ruin the vibe, he was planning to announce that he'd gotten my sister pregnant while under federal investigation for crimes that could send him to prison for decades. There's something else, Derek said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Something I need to tell you before you make your decision. I waited. I've been using Emma's identity and social security number to open some of the business accounts for TechFlow. If the FBI decides to pursue criminal charges against the company, Emma could be charged as an accomplice. The room went completely silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Derek had not only married my sister under false pretenses, he'd made her an unwitting participant in federal crimes. You used her identity without her knowledge. I needed additional business accounts, and the banks were asking too many questions about my personal credit history. So you committed identity theft against your own wife. I protected our family's financial interests while ensuring that TechFlow could continue operating. Derek, Emma could go to prison. Not if you help me resolve this situation before it gets that far. I stared at this man who had once been my friend, who was now my brother-in-law, and who had just revealed the full scope of his betrayal and manipulation. He'd stolen from me 5 years ago. He'd targeted and married my sister as part of some twisted attempt to control the situation. He'd put Emma's freedom and future at risk to protect his own criminal enterprise. And now he was asking me to help him cover it all up. I need time to think about this, I said finally. How much time? 48 hours. Derek nodded, gathering up his papers and folders. Thank you for listening. I know this is complicated, but I think we can find a solution that works for everyone. As he reached the door, I called out to him. Derek. He turned back. If you think I'm going to help you destroy my sister's life to save your own, you don't know me at all. His smile was cold and calculated. If you think you can destroy my life without destroying Emma's, you don't understand the situation at all. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room staring out at Lake Michigan. The gray water stretched to the horizon, choppy and cold under the November sky. Somewhere in the distance, families were gathering for Thanksgiving dinner, sharing gratitude and creating memories. My sister was married to a federal criminal who had stolen from me, lied to her, and put her future in jeopardy. She was carrying his child and had no idea that her entire world was built on fraud and deception. And I had 48 hours to figure out how to save her. The rest of Thanksgiving Day passed in a blur of research and planning. I remained in my office long after Derek left, using my professional access to financial databases and investigation resources to piece together the full scope of his criminal activities. What I discovered was far worse than even Derek had admitted. TechFlow Solutions wasn't just providing audit avoidance services to a few dozen companies. The operation was massive and sophisticated, involving shell companies, offshore accounts, and a network of corrupt accountants and financial consultants across multiple states. Derek had been systematically licensing modified versions of our original audit tech software to companies that wanted to hide financial crimes. But more than that, he'd been actively recruiting new clients by advertising his services as regulatory compliance optimization and audit-resistant financial structuring. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence that TechFlow's clients had successfully hidden over $40 million in fraudulent activity over the past 3 years. Derek wasn't just a small-time scammer who'd gotten in over his head. He was running a sophisticated criminal enterprise that was undermining financial regulatory systems across the region. But the most devastating discovery came when I traced the business accounts associated with TechFlow Solutions. Derek hadn't just used Emma's social security number to open a few bank accounts. He'd systematically used her identity to establish credit lines, register shell companies, and even apply for business loans. Emma's name was attached to over a dozen financial accounts that she knew nothing about. If the FBI chose to prosecute aggressively, they could charge her with conspiracy, money laundering, and securities fraud. Even if she was ultimately cleared of criminal liability, the legal process could take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in defense fees. My sister was financially and legally entangled with Derek's crimes in ways that would be almost impossible to untangle without expert help, and she was completely unaware of the danger she was in. By 7 o'clock that evening, I'd made my decision. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in over 2 years. Patricia Williams. Patricia, it's Sonia. I need to see you. Patricia had been my supervisor during my first year at Morrison & Associates, before she'd left to take a position as a forensic accountant with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She was one of the most brilliant investigators I'd ever worked with, and more importantly, someone I trusted completely. Sonia, what are you doing calling me on Thanksgiving? I'm sorry to bother you on the holiday, but I have a situation that I think you need to know about. Are you free to meet tonight? How serious is this situation? Federal criminal investigation serious, securities fraud serious, and it involves someone in my family. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'll meet you at Lincoln Coffee in an hour. Lincoln Coffee was a 24-hour diner in the Loop that catered to night shift workers and insomniacs. At 8 o'clock on Thanksgiving evening, it was nearly empty except for a couple of cab drivers and a woman reading a novel in the corner booth. Patricia arrived 5 minutes after I did, still wearing the casual clothes she'd presumably worn to her own family dinner. She looked exactly as I remembered her, sharp, focused, and completely unintimidated by complicated problems. Talk to me, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I told her everything: Derek's history with me at Audit Tech, his marriage to Emma, his request for consultation that morning, the FBI investigation, the identity theft, Emma's pregnancy, and her complete ignorance of the situation she was in. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a small notepad she'd pulled from her purse. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd told her. This Derek Matthews has been on our radar for months, she said finally. He has? Not by name initially. We've been tracking a network of financial consultants who've been helping companies avoid detection during audit processes. TechFlow Solutions was identified as a key player about 6 months ago, but we didn't have enough evidence to move forward until the Meridian Technologies case broke open. So you know about his operation. We know about part of it. What you've told me tonight fills in some gaps we've been trying to understand. Patricia, my sister is in serious trouble, isn't she? Potentially, yes. If her identity was used to facilitate criminal financial activities, she could be charged as an accessory even if she had no knowledge of what was happening. Even though she's clearly a victim of identity theft? Proving that she had no knowledge would require a lengthy legal process. And frankly, prosecutors sometimes prefer to charge spouses and then offer plea bargains rather than trying to untangle complex financial relationships. The reality of Emma's situation hit me like a physical blow. Even if she was ultimately vindicated, the legal process could destroy her life. She'd face criminal charges while pregnant, potentially lose her job, and spend years fighting to clear her name. What can I do to protect her? Patricia considered this carefully. The best protection for your sister would be evidence that clearly demonstrates she was a victim rather than a participant. If we could show that Derek systematically deceived her and used her identity without her knowledge, prosecutors would be much less likely to charge her. How do we get that evidence? We need Derek to admit what he did, on record, with details about how he used her identity and confirmation that she had no knowledge of his activities. You want me to get him to confess. I want you to consider working with us to gather evidence that could protect your sister and help us understand the full scope of Derek's operation. Patricia explained how it would work. If I agreed to cooperate with the FBI investigation, they could provide me with recording equipment and guidance on how to extract admissions from Derek. The goal wouldn't just be to protect Emma, but to gather enough evidence to dismantle the entire financial fraud network that Derek was operating. What would happen to him? If he's convicted on the charges we're considering, he's looking at significant federal prison time. 10 to 20 years, depending on the scope of the fraud and his willingness to cooperate with investigations of his clients. 10 to 20 years. Emma's husband and the father of her unborn child could be going to federal prison for decades. There's something else you need to know, Patricia said. We have evidence that Derek has been transferring money out of the country over the past month. Large amounts. If he's planning to flee, he could disappear at any time. How large? Over $2 million moved to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. My heart sank. Derek wasn't just trying to avoid prosecution. He was preparing to abandon Emma entirely, leaving her to face criminal charges while he escaped to a non-extradition jurisdiction. If he runs, what happens to Emma? She becomes the primary target of the investigation. Prosecutors would assume that she was either a willing participant or that she helped him escape. The situation was even worse than I'd realized. Derek wasn't just putting Emma at risk through his criminal activities. He was actively preparing to sacrifice her to save himself. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll work with you to get evidence against Derek." Patricia nodded. "We'll need you to meet with him again. Try to get him to provide details about how he used Emma's identity, confirmation that she didn't know about his activities, and if possible, information about his plans to leave the country." "When?" "As soon as possible. If he's planning to flee, we don't have much time." We spent the next hour planning the approach. Patricia would provide me with recording equipment and specific questions designed to elicit the most legally useful admissions. I would arrange a follow-up meeting with Derek under the pretense of negotiating my cooperation with his defense. As we prepared to leave the diner, Patricia asked me one more question. "Are you prepared for the possibility that your sister might blame you for Derek's arrest?" I'd been thinking about that exact question all evening. Emma loved Derek. She was carrying his child. When she learned the truth about who he really was and what he'd done, she might very well blame me for destroying her marriage and her future. But Emma was also my sister, and she deserved to know the truth about the man she'd married, even if that truth was devastating. "I'm prepared," I said. "Good. Because once we start this process, there's no going back." Friday afternoon, I called Derek and arranged a meeting for Saturday evening. I told him I'd considered his proposal and wanted to discuss the terms of my cooperation. He was eager to meet, suggesting that his anxiety about the FBI investigation was increasing. Instead of meeting at my office, I suggested we meet at our parents' house in Oak Park. I told him that I thought it would be good for Emma to be present for the conversation, since any arrangement between Derek and me would affect her future too. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already called Emma and suggested a family meeting to clear the air about Thanksgiving. I'd apologized for creating tension and expressed my desire to get to know Derek better. Emma had been thrilled at the prospect of family reconciliation and had eagerly agreed to host a Saturday evening gathering. I also didn't tell Derek that I was wearing a wire. Saturday evening, I drove to my childhood home in Oak Park feeling more nervous than I'd felt since my first federal court testimony. The small recording device Patricia had given me was hidden beneath my sweater, invisible but constantly reminding me of its presence. My parents' house looked exactly as it had during my childhood. The same red brick facade, the same oak tree in the front yard that I'd climbed as a little girl, the same porch where Emma and I had spent summer evenings catching fireflies. Emma answered the door with a radiant smile, looking healthier and happier than I'd seen her in years. Her pregnancy wasn't visible yet, but there was a glow about her that made the deception Derek was perpetrating feel even more despicable. "I'm so glad you came," she said, hugging me tightly. "Derek feels terrible about the Thanksgiving thing. He wants to make it right." "I'm glad we can work things out," I said, though the words felt like ashes in my mouth. My parents were in the living room, clearly pleased to see their daughters reconciling. Dad was watching football with the sound turned low, while Mom bustled around offering everyone coffee and the leftover pie from their Thanksgiving dinner. Derek arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing the same charming smile I remembered from family gatherings. He greeted my parents warmly, kissed Emma hello, and shook my hand with what appeared to be genuine relief. "Sonia, I can't tell you how glad I am that we can put our professional disagreement behind us," he said loudly enough for my parents to hear. For the next hour, we made small talk about work, the upcoming holidays, and Emma's excitement about redecorating their apartment. Derek was in full performance mode, playing the role of the devoted husband and respectful son-in-law. Finally, I suggested that Derek and I step outside to discuss our business arrangement privately. Emma offered to make hot chocolate for everyone while we talked, giving us privacy on the back porch. The November evening was crisp and clear, with the bare branches of the oak trees creating intricate patterns against the star-filled sky. In other circumstances, it might have been a perfect setting for a family gathering. "So," Derek said once we were alone, "have you decided to help me?" "I've decided to hear you out," I said carefully, "but I need you to be completely honest with me about Emma's situation. If I'm going to risk my professional reputation to help you, I need to know exactly what kind of legal exposure she has. Derek relaxed visibly, apparently believing that my request for honesty indicated willingness to cooperate. Emma doesn't have any legal exposure, he said. She's completely innocent of everything. But you said you used her identity for business accounts. Just a few accounts, nothing significant. Derek, I need exact details. How many accounts? What kinds of transactions? How much money? He shifted uncomfortably. Maybe more than a few accounts. But Emma never had access to them. She never even knew they existed. How many accounts? I don't know exactly, 10 or 12 maybe. Derek, my cooperation depends on complete honesty. How many accounts did you open using Emma's identity? He was quiet for nearly a minute, looking out at the darkened yard. When he finally answered, his voice was barely audible. Maybe 15 or 20 accounts, and a few business registrations, and some credit applications. What was the total value of the financial activity in those accounts? I don't know off the top of my head. Estimate. Maybe $5 or $6 million over the past 2 years. The number was staggering. Derek had been moving millions of dollars through accounts opened under Emma's identity, creating a paper trail that could implicate her in money laundering and conspiracy charges. Derek, that's not a few accounts. That's systematic identity theft. I was protecting our family's financial interests. You were using your wife as an unwitting front for criminal activity. Emma is completely innocent. She never knew about any of this. Can you prove that she didn't know? Of course I can prove it. She never had access to the accounts. She never signed any documents. She never even saw the bank statements. How can you be sure she never saw bank statements? Because I made sure they were delivered to a separate address. I used a mail forwarding service to keep all the TechFlow business correspondence separate from our personal mail. Perfect. Derek was providing exactly the kind of detail that would demonstrate Emma's innocence while confirming his own criminal activities. What about the pregnancy? I asked. When did you find out Emma was pregnant? About 6 weeks ago. We've been trying for a while, so we're both thrilled. And you haven't told her about the FBI investigation? There's no reason to worry her while she's pregnant. Stress can be dangerous for the baby. But if you're convicted, she'll be affected. I'm not going to be convicted if you help me resolve this situation. What if I can't help you? What if the evidence against you is too strong? Derek's expression changed, becoming harder and more calculating. That's not an option I'm willing to consider. But hypothetically, if you were facing serious prison time, what would you do? I'd do whatever was necessary to protect my family. What does that mean? It means I'd make sure Emma and the baby were financially secure no matter what happened to me. How would you do that? Derek looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure we were still alone on the porch. I've been moving some assets to secure locations, just as a precaution. What kind of assets? Money, investment accounts, things that the FBI might try to seize if they decide to pursue asset forfeiture. How much money? Enough to take care of Emma and the baby for a long time. Derek, are you planning to leave the country? His silence was answer enough. You're going to abandon Emma while she's pregnant. I'm going to make sure she's provided for. By disappearing and leaving her to face criminal charges alone, Emma won't face criminal charges if you help me resolve this situation before it gets that far. And if I don't help you? Derek's mask finally slipped completely. If you don't help me, Emma will pay the price for your stubbornness, just like you paid the price 5 years ago for being so inflexible about business arrangements. Are you threatening my sister? I'm explaining reality to you. Emma's financial future is tied to mine. If I go down, she goes down with me, unless you help me avoid that outcome. By lying to federal investigators, by telling the truth about what the audit tech software was originally designed to do, and ignoring what you used it for. And focusing on solutions rather than blame. I stared at this man who had been systematically destroying my sister's life while convincing her that he loved her. He'd stolen from me, lied to her, put her freedom at risk, and was now preparing to abandon her entirely. And he was asking me to help him get away with all of it. I need to think about this more, I said finally. How much more time do you need? Until tomorrow. Sonia, time is running short. The FBI could move at any moment. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to build a criminal enterprise using stolen software and your wife's identity. Derek's composure cracked completely. You self-righteous bitch. You've always thought you were better than everyone else. You couldn't stand that I was successful while you were struggling with debt. And now you can't stand that Emma chose me over your constant negativity and judgment. Emma chose you because you lied to her about who you are. Emma chose me because I give her a life you never could. Financial security, excitement, a future that's bigger than a boring office job and a lonely apartment. Emma chose you because she doesn't know you're a criminal. Emma chose me because she's smart enough to recognize opportunity when she sees it. The back door opened, and Emma stepped out onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. I thought you guys might be getting cold out here, she said, smiling at both of us. Actually, Emma, I think Derek and I are done with our business discussion, I said, accepting the mug from her. Thank you for hosting tonight. I should probably head home. So soon? Emma looked disappointed. I was hoping we could all watch a movie together or something, like old times. Another time, I said, hugging her goodbye. I'm really glad Derek and I could clear the air. Derek shook my hand with what appeared to be friendly warmth. I'll call you tomorrow to follow up on our conversation. I'll be waiting for your call. As I drove away from my parents' house, I felt the weight of the recording device under my sweater and thought about what would happen when Patricia and her colleagues heard Derek's admissions. His confession about using Emma's identity for criminal activities would protect her from prosecution. His threats about what would happen if I didn't cooperate would demonstrate his willingness to manipulate and endanger family members for his own benefit. Most importantly, his admission about moving assets out of the country would give the FBI grounds to arrest him immediately before he could flee. But it also meant that Emma's world was about to be completely destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. How did it go? I texted back. I got everything you need. Her response came immediately. We'll pick him up tomorrow morning. Sunday morning, I woke up early and drove to Emma's apartment. I needed to be there when the FBI arrested Derek, both to support my sister and to make sure she had accurate information about what was happening and why. Emma and Derek lived in a modern high-rise in River North, the kind of sleek building that screamed expensive rent and successful young professionals. I parked across the street and waited, knowing that Patricia's team would be arriving soon. At exactly 8 o'clock, 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of the building. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged and entered the lobby. I crossed the street and followed them, knowing that my presence might complicate the arrest but unwilling to let Emma face this alone. By the time I reached their floor, I could hear Derek shouting from inside the apartment. The door was open, with FBI agents securing the scene while Patricia read Derek his rights. Emma was standing in the living room wearing a bathrobe, her face completely white with shock. When she saw me in the hallway, her expression shifted from confusion to betrayal. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Why are you here? Did you know about this?" Before I could answer, Derek saw me standing behind the FBI agents. His reaction was explosive. "This is her fault," he screamed, pointing at me. "She set me up. She's been planning this for years." Patricia stepped between Derek and me. "Mr. Matthews, you need to calm down. She's been stalking me since graduate school," Derek continued shouting. "She's obsessed with destroying my life because she couldn't handle that I was more successful than her." "Derek, that's not true," Emma said, looking between us with growing confusion. "She recorded our conversation last night," Derek said. "She tricked me into admitting things that weren't even true." "Everything you admitted was true," I said quietly, "and Emma deserves to know the truth about what you've done." Patricia stepped forward with handcuffs. "Derek Matthews, you're under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and identity theft." As they led Derek away, he made one final attempt to hurt everyone around him. "The baby isn't even mine," he screamed at Emma. "I know about Marcus. I know about the affair you had before we got married." Emma collapsed into tears as the FBI agents escorted Derek from the apartment. I rushed to her side, holding her as she sobbed with grief and humiliation. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "I don't understand any of this." "I'm going to explain everything," I promised, "and I'm going to help you get through this." As we sat together on her couch while FBI agents searched the apartment for evidence, I began the difficult process of explaining to my sister who Derek Matthews really was and what he'd done to both of us. The weeks following Derek's arrest were the most difficult period in our family's history. Emma moved back into our parents' house temporarily while FBI agents completed their search of her apartment and froze the bank accounts that Derek had opened using her identity. The truth about Derek's criminal activities was devastating, but even worse was Emma's realization that her entire marriage had been built on deception. The man she'd thought she knew didn't exist. Derek Matthews was a con artist who had targeted her specifically because of her relationship to me. The pregnancy added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Emma's doctor confirmed that the baby was healthy and developing normally, but the emotional stress of the situation had Emma barely eating or sleeping. She spent most days in her childhood bedroom, crying and trying to process the complete destruction of everything she'd believed about her life. Our parents struggled to understand how they'd been so completely fooled by Derek. Dad kept muttering about how he should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. Mom alternated between guilt about excluding me from Thanksgiving and fury at Derek for manipulating their daughter. But slowly, with the support of family therapy and Emma's own remarkable inner strength, we began to heal. The FBI investigation revealed the full scope of Derek's criminal enterprise. He had been operating fraudulent consultation services for over 5 years, helping dozens of companies hide financial crimes and enabling over $50 million in securities fraud. The audit tech software that he'd stolen from me had been central to his ability to provide these services effectively. More importantly for Emma, the investigation confirmed that she had been a victim of identity theft rather than a willing participant in Derek's crimes. The recordings I'd made of our conversation provided clear evidence that Emma had no knowledge of the accounts opened in her name or the criminal activities they were used to facilitate. Federal prosecutors declined to charge Emma with any crimes. Instead, they helped her file identity theft reports and worked with her to unravel the financial accounts that Derek had created using her personal information. Derek was eventually sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and identity theft. He also agreed to pay restitution to his victims, including the $2 million he had stolen from me 5 years earlier. The restitution payment allowed me to establish my own financial consulting firm, specializing in fraud prevention and detection. The publicity from Derek's case had made me something of an expert in the field of software-based financial crimes, and companies across the country sought out my services. But more important than the professional vindication was the healing that happened within our family. Emma and I had long conversations about the patterns in her relationship choices and the ways that Derek had manipulated her emotions and isolated her from family members who might have seen through his deceptions. She began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of emotional and financial abuse. Our parents attended family therapy sessions where they learned to recognize their own role in enabling Emma's poor choices while dismissing my legitimate concerns. They made genuine apologies for the years of treating me as the problem when I was actually trying to protect the family. Most importantly, Emma began to rebuild her sense of self-worth and independence. She took a new position with a marketing firm that specialized in nonprofit organizations, work that felt meaningful and aligned with her values. She moved into a small apartment near our parents' house and began preparing for single motherhood with determination and grace. The baby was born on a beautiful April morning, a healthy girl with Emma's dark eyes and a strong set of lungs. Emma named her Charlotte Rose, after our grandmother who had always been the strongest woman in our family. I was in the delivery room when Charlotte was born, holding Emma's hand as she brought new life into the world. In that moment, surrounded by the joy of new beginnings and the love of family, the pain of the past year felt worth it. 6 months later, we celebrated Charlotte's baptism with a small gathering at our parents' house. Emma was radiant with happiness, holding her daughter and surrounded by people who truly loved and supported her. She'd learned to trust her own judgment again and had developed the confidence to set boundaries with people who didn't have her best interests at heart. During the reception, Emma pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I need to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I know how hard it must have been to expose Derek, knowing how much it would hurt me initially, but you saved my life, Sonia. You saved Charlotte's life too." "You would have done the same thing for me," I said. "I hope so, but I'm not sure I would have had the courage you showed." "You have more courage than you realize. Look at everything you've overcome this year." Emma looked out at the backyard where our parents were taking turns holding Charlotte and making silly faces to entertain her. "I keep thinking about how different things would be if Derek had succeeded in fleeing the country," she said. "I would have been left facing criminal charges while pregnant, and Charlotte might have grown up visiting me in prison. That didn't happen. Because you wouldn't let it happen. We hugged tightly, and I felt the completion of a journey that had started with pain and betrayal but had ultimately led to deeper trust and understanding between us. The last time I saw Derek was during his sentencing hearing 8 months after his arrest. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his crimes and the collapse of all his elaborate deceptions. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Derek stood and delivered a brief statement about accepting responsibility for his actions. He didn't apologize to Emma, he didn't apologize to me. He didn't acknowledge the pain he'd caused to his victims or to the family members who had trusted him. But as he was led away to begin his 18-year prison sentence, I felt a profound sense of closure. Derek Matthews could no longer hurt anyone I loved. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and the people who mattered most to me were safe. That Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year after I'd been excluded from the family dinner, we gathered again at our parents' house. But this time, I was the guest of honor. Emma insisted that I carve the turkey, saying that I'd earned the right to be recognized as the person who had saved our family. As I stood at the head of the table with the carving knife in my hand, I looked around at the faces of the people I loved most in the world. My parents, who had learned to value honesty over harmony. Emma, who had discovered her own strength and resilience. And Charlotte, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, representing hope and new beginnings. Before we eat, I said, I want to share what I'm most grateful for this year. What's that? Dad asked. I'm grateful that we learn the difference between keeping the peace and protecting each other. I'm grateful that love sometimes means saying difficult truths, even when they hurt temporarily. And I'm grateful that family isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about standing together when facing real challenges. Emma raised her glass of sparkling cider. To family, the real kind. We all raised our glasses and toasted to the difficult lessons learned and the stronger relationships forged through hardship. As I carved the turkey and served generous portions to everyone around the table, I reflected on the profound truth that had emerged from our painful journey. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who refuse to let us make destructive choices unchallenged. Sometimes protection looks like confrontation, and sometimes healing requires the courage to expose painful truths. Derek Matthews had taught me that people will often choose comfortable lies over difficult realities. But my family had learned something more valuable. That authentic love requires the courage to speak truth, even when that truth is unwelcome. The woman who had been excluded from Thanksgiving dinner 1 year earlier was now surrounded by family members who valued her judgment and appreciated her willingness to fight for their safety and well-being. The journey had been painful, but it had ultimately led to the kind of deep, honest relationships that can weather any storm. That night, after dinner and dishes and long conversations about Charlotte's latest developmental milestones, I drove home through the Chicago streets feeling more grateful than I'd ever felt in my life. Not just for the professional success and financial recovery that had come from exposing Derek's crimes, but for the family relationships that had been rebuilt on foundations of truth and mutual respect. The next morning, I woke up in my Lincoln Park apartment with sunlight streaming through the windows and the sounds of the city beginning another day. I made coffee and checked my email, finding messages from 3 potential new clients and an invitation to speak at a conference on financial crime prevention. My life was fuller and more purposeful than it had ever been, but more importantly, the people I loved were safe and thriving. Sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied, especially when you have the courage and persistence to fight for what's right. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to refuse to enable their self-destructive choices. And sometimes the truth that seems most devastating in the moment is actually the foundation for building something much stronger and more genuine. Has there ever been a time in your life when you had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting someone you love? Have you experienced the challenge of speaking difficult truths to family members who didn't want to hear them? I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of choosing truth over comfort. Thank you for listening to my story. And I hope it reminds you that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to stay silent when the people you care about are in danger.